The city never truly slept. Even when the night grew quiet, it listened. Cars moved like restless spirits along narrow roads, market lights blinked through dusty windows, and voices floated from balconies stacked one above the other. In this city, walls were thin, eyes were sharp, and stories traveled faster than footsteps. A whispered word in the morning could become a loud truth by evening. Here, no family suffered alone, because the city always watched. In one respected neighborhood, houses stood close, painted neatly, their gates locked more for show than safety. People greeted each other with warm smiles, but every greeting carried judgment behind it. Respect was measured by how clean your front yard looked and how obedient your family appeared. What happened inside homes was rarely questioned, as long as the outside remained calm. A woman passing by once murmured to another, "If people greet you with respect, then your house must be in order." No one asked what order truly meant. Behind modern walls, tradition ruled quietly but firmly. Flat-screen televisions hung beside old rules that could not be questioned. Children were taught early who must be obeyed and who must never be challenged. Inside this house, hierarchy was clear. The older spoke, the younger listened. Obedience was praised more than kindness. Even love was expected to follow rank. The clash between new ideas and old beliefs lived in every corner, like two shadows sharing one body. At the center of this household stood the mother-in-law. Her presence filled rooms before she spoke. In the community, she was known as a strong woman, disciplined, proper, respected. "She runs her home well," neighbors often said. But inside, fear held her power together. She believed marriage was not built on love, but control. Honor, to her, meant silence from those below her. One evening, she looked around the house and said firmly, "In this family, everyone knows their place." No one argued. Even the walls seemed to agree. Her authority was not loud, but it was heavy. And in that weight, the seeds of conflict quietly began to grow. In public, the mother-in-law wore respect like fine clothing. At community meetings, she greeted elders with lowered eyes and gentle words. She shared advice with a soft smile and spoke about family unity as if it lived in her chest. Neighbors often said, "That woman has a good heart." She accepted their praise calmly, as though it was her birthright. But when the gate closed behind her, her voice hardened. Kindness slipped away, replaced by sharp looks and colder words. The same mouth that blessed outside could wound inside, and no one beyond those walls ever saw the difference. The daughter-in-law entered that house with hope folded carefully in her heart. She had grown in the city, learned to speak with respect, and believed peace could be built through patience. On her first morning, she greeted her mother-in-law softly and said, "I am here to learn and to serve this family." Her eyes held sincerity, not fear. She believed marriage was a joining of hands, not a test of strength. In her mind, respect was shared, not demanded. She did not know that her calm spirit would be taken as a challenge. Each day, she tried to belong. She woke early, kept the house clean, and spoke gently even when spoken to harshly. When food was criticized, she nodded. When silence followed her words, she smiled anyway. At night, she told herself, "Tomorrow will be better." She believed effort could melt even the hardest heart. Yet, beneath the quiet routine, something heavy watched her, measuring her every move. Her husband saw it all but said little. He loved his wife, yet his mother's shadow stretched long over him. When his wife whispered, "Your mother is unhappy with me," he replied softly, "Just be patient. She will change." His fear of confrontation wrapped itself in silence. Each time he chose peace over truth, the balance tipped further. And without knowing it, his silence became another stone on his wife's burden, preparing the ground for what was yet to come. Control did not arrive like a storm. It came like a quiet wind. At first, it sounded like advice. "Hold the broom this way," the mother-in-law said one morning, watching closely. "A woman must learn properly." The daughter-in-law nodded and adjusted her hands, even though she had cleaned homes long before marriage. Another day it was the food. "This salt is too much," the older woman said, pushing the plate aside. "In this house, we eat with discipline." The words were calm, but they carried weight. Each correction landed softly, yet they piled up. Small laughs followed her mistakes, never loud enough to challenge, always sharp enough to sting. Outside the gate, Smiles bloomed easily. The mother-in-law greeted neighbors warmly. "My daughter is still learning," she would say kindly, shaking her head with a laugh. "Marriage teaches patience." People nodded with sympathy. "You are strong," they told her. Inside, the tone changed. "Do not embarrass me again," she warned quietly after visitors left. The house learned 2 languages, one for the street, one for the walls. The daughter-in-law chose peace over protest. When hurtful words came, she swallowed them. When blamed, she bowed her head. At night, she told herself, "Endure today so tomorrow may be better." Her silence was meant to protect harmony, but it was heard as permission. Each quiet moment taught the other woman that power faced no resistance. Slowly, the house tilted. One voice grew heavier, the other lighter. Decisions came from one side, obedience from the other. Even laughter felt careful. In that home, respect no longer flowed, it was demanded. And beneath the calm surface, tension stretched tight, waiting for the day it would no longer hold. Inside the house, words moved like snakes in tall grass, quiet, unseen, yet dangerous. The walls listened, but they never spoke. Laughter lived outside the gate, but inside, voices dropped low. When neighbors passed by, respect sat proudly on every face. When the door closed, respect left with them. The daughter-in-law learned quickly that pain hides best where no witness stands. A proverb often whispered by elders came alive in that home: "A drum beaten inside the hut is never heard in the village." And so, cruelty grew strong in silence, fed by secrecy and protected by smiles. Each morning brought lessons that were not meant to teach, but to shrink. "Do not speak like that," the mother-in-law would say, eyes sharp. "Your tongue shows where you came from." When the girl sat quietly, she was told, "Why are you dull?" A good wife knows when to speak. Even her walk was corrected. "Lift your head, but not too high," the older woman warned. "Pride ruins women." Every word was wrapped as guidance, yet each one chipped away at her confidence. The daughter-in-law began to doubt even her breathing, wondering if it too was wrong. Tradition, once meant to guide with wisdom, was sharpened into a blade. "In our culture," the mother-in-law declared, "a wife obeys without question." When the girl asked gently, "May I rest for a moment?" the answer came fast. Did our mothers rest? Tradition made them strong. But tradition had also taught kindness and balance, lessons now forgotten. Obedience was demanded, but compassion was missing. Culture became a shield for cruelty, and the daughter-in-law learned that customs spoken without love become tools of harm. Chores filled her days, heavy with more than work. She swept the compound again and again, even when it was clean. She washed clothes until her fingers cracked, then was told, "You missed a spot." "Work builds character," the mother-in-law said, watching closely. But this work carried shame, not purpose. No one helped. No one thanked her. Labor was no longer shared. It was assigned to remind her of her place. Each task whispered, "You are small here." When troubles came, one door was always knocked. If food spoiled, it was her fault. If the husband returned home quiet, she was blamed. "You bring bad air into this house," the mother-in-law said once, shaking her head. The daughter-in-law stood silent, tears burning behind her eyes. She had become the answer to every problem, the basket where all failures were dropped. Yet still she hoped. Like the seed buried deep in hard soil, she waited, unaware that pressure was shaping her for a storm yet to rise. At family gatherings, the mother-in-law wore her smile like a crown. She laughed at jokes, praised the cook, and patted her daughter-in-law's back with practiced gentleness. "She is learning," she would say, glancing at her quietly. Outsiders saw a woman of patience, a household at peace, and a daughter-in-law who was polite and well-mannered. But behind closed doors, the same hands that patted would tighten, voices that praised would sting, and eyes that seemed soft would glint with warning. The warmth of the celebrations was only skin-deep, masking a household divided by whispered commands and sharp glances. Slowly, the daughter-in-law's reputation shifted without her knowledge. In quiet corners of the neighborhood, the mother-in-law hinted, "She comes from the city, and one never knows what they bring with them." At weddings, markets, and community meetings, relatives nodded, uncertain, as small seeds of doubt took root. Compliments once freely given grew cautious. The daughter-in-law noticed fewer smiles, felt fewer invitations, and sensed polite distance where warmth had once been. Each remark, each glance, withdrew respect like a river slowly carving away a riverbank. Though she lived in a full house, the daughter-in-law felt the weight of loneliness pressing in. Laughter from other rooms reached her ears, yet never included her. Meals were served, rooms were shared, but she was left to move through them as though she were invisible. Her heart ached for recognition, for a word of kindness that was sincere, yet it rarely came. The isolation was not of walls or doors, but of spirit, a quiet, gnawing emptiness she carried from sunrise to sunset. Her husband watched, yet said little. When she whispered, "Mother does not trust me," he would answer, "Be patient. Things will change." When her eyes filled with tears, he would nod silently and retreat. His silence became another weight pressing down, a second betrayal as heavy as the first. Without words of support, her strength was tested. Without his defense, the house's power imbalance grew sharper, each act of cruelty reinforced by the absence of his voice. "Tradition must be honored," the mother-in-law declared one afternoon, her voice echoing in the empty corners. "A wife must obey, and questions weaken the home." Any attempt by the daughter-in-law to speak of fairness was labeled rebellion, her voice dismissed as disrespectful or naive. Old ways became swords, slicing through attempts at equality. Patience was mistaken for weakness, and courage for disobedience. In this home, truth was trapped beneath layers of unquestioned rules, leaving the daughter-in-law to navigate a world where fairness and justice were words spoken only for outsiders to hear. The daughter-in-law moved through the house with quiet dignity. Her back straight, her voice measured, her gaze steady. She did not flinch when her mother-in-law's eyes sharpened like knives. "Do not correct me in my own home," she said softly once, her tone calm but firm. The older woman heard it differently. "She grows proud," she whispered to herself, "thinking she can stand above me." Every act of patience, every refusal to bow too far, became another excuse to remind the girl of her place. Strength, in that household, was mistaken for disrespect, and virtue became a fault to punish. Fear wrapped itself around the mother-in-law's heart like a serpent. The thought that her son might turn to another, that loyalty could slip through her fingers, was unbearable. She watched every glance he gave, every smile he offered, measuring it against her own authority. "No one will take him from me," she muttered while preparing meals with precision. Control grew tighter with each passing day. More rules, more demands, more subtle warnings. Her insecurity, masked as discipline, spread like shadow over every corner of the house. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Neighbors, relatives, and friends passed along stories carefully shaped to weaken the daughter-in-law. "She is not like us," one woman said to another in the marketplace. "I hear she disrespects the family," another murmured over a teacup. The daughter-in-law's face remained calm when these lies reached her, but inside, a quiet ache grew. Each story built walls between her and those who should have trusted her. Even small misunderstandings within the house were magnified into evidence of disloyalty, weakening the fragile bonds that held her marriage together. The husband began to listen more closely to the voices around him than to his own heart. "Perhaps she does not respect our ways," a cousin suggested during a visit. He paused, then nodded, the shadow of doubt settling over him. Quietly, he questioned her words, her gestures, and her intentions. Moments that had once been shared with ease now carried hesitation. The marriage, built on love and hope, began to crack under the weight of whispers, untruths, and growing tension. Through it all, the daughter-in-law held her silence. She did not shout, she did not fight. She chose restraint, preserving her dignity like a sacred possession. Each calm smile, each patient nod, was a shield against injustice. Yet her quiet endurance was misunderstood. "She surrenders," the mother-in-law said to herself, watching the house bend to her will. But in truth, every silent act was a seed of strength, quietly gathering power for the day when fairness would finally be seen and cruelty could no longer hide behind respect. Every day that passed, the daughter-in-law endured quietly. She bowed, she smiled, she whispered polite words where sharper ones could have cut. But each act of patience fed the mother-in-law's confidence. "She fears nothing," the older woman said to herself, tightening control over the household. With every nod and silent apology, the daughter-in-law's dignity became a weapon against her own peace. The oppressor grows stronger when no hand rises to stop her. Each measured breath of the innocent was taken as weakness, each careful step an invitation to push harder. One afternoon, the mother-in-law chose a moment that could not be hidden behind closed doors. Guests had arrived for a small family gathering, neighbors and relatives filling the living room with chatter and laughter. "See how careless she is," the mother-in-law said, loud enough for everyone to hear, as the daughter-in-law carried a tray of tea. "Even this simple task escapes her. Must I show her again?" Heads turned, eyebrows raised, whispers rising. The daughter-in-law froze, the tray trembling in her hands. Her honor, the silent thread that held her dignity, was shredded in front of witnesses, and the insult reached deeper than any private rebuke ever could. The weight of shame pressed down on her chest. She stepped aside, lowered the tray, and felt the cold eyes of the community upon her. Every whisper, every glance, became a silent jury condemning her. Even those who once smiled now seemed to measure her worth against the mother-in-law's narrative. Silence could not erase the humiliation. The water in her hands did not wash away the stain of judgment. It clung to her spirit like dust in the dry season. In the quiet hours that followed, a thought settled in her mind like dawn breaking over the horizon. Endurance alone will not stop cruelty. Silence protects injustice. Her calm was no longer merely for peace. It became a lens of clarity, revealing the truth. Patience without action could not reclaim respect, could not restore fairness. And so, a new resolve formed. She began to plan quietly, carefully, like a river finding its path around stones. Anger did not guide her. Dignity did. Every step was measured, every move deliberate. She would confront injustice, but with wisdom, not wrath. She would reclaim her honor without lowering herself to cruelty. The house that had stood on pride would meet the quiet force of truth, and the daughter-in-law, calm and resolute, prepared to restore balance where deceit had reigned. The house that had once echoed only with whispers of cruelty now held a different tension. The daughter-in-law stood in the quiet of her room, her hands folded, her breath steady. She had endured enough. Each silent apology, each bowed head, had been a shield, but it no longer served justice. "No more," she told herself. "Patience has shown me the way. Now wisdom must guide my steps." Her eyes, once lowered in fear, now held a sharpness that could see through deceit. She would act, but not with anger. Her power would come from clarity, from measured purpose. She chose truth as her blade, sharper than any raised voice. It would not wound, but illuminate. "The truth is heavier than a lie," she whispered to the empty room, feeling the weight settle around her like a cloak. Every injustice endured, every manipulation witnessed, became a lesson in discernment. Justice, she understood, did not demand shouting or spectacle. It required patience, observation, and timing. Her plan was not revenge, but the restoration of what had been taken: honor, dignity, and fairness. The system that had once bound her now offered a path. The rules of the community, the traditions that the mother-in-law had wielded as weapons, could become tools of balance. She studied the ceremonies, the family hierarchies, the gatherings where gossip took root. These were not chains, they were instruments, and if used wisely, they could expose falsehoods while preserving her own integrity. Tradition itself would speak in her favor if she allowed it to do so. Behind closed doors, she began the quiet work of observation. She listened to conversations, noting inconsistencies, small lies, and contradictions. Each act of manipulation was recorded in her mind, each untruth weighed carefully. No one knew of her vigilance. No voice was raised, no gesture betrayed suspicion. The daughter-in-law collected evidence like a spider weaving a web, patient and unseen. The strands were many, delicate, but they promised strength when woven together at the right moment. All the while, she maintained respect. She did not lash out, did not insult, did not mirror cruelty with cruelty. Her calm became a shield, her dignity a fortress. Even when the mother-in-law spoke harshly or cast sharp glances, the daughter-in-law's composure never faltered. In the eyes of the family and the community, she remained the patient, respectful daughter-in-law. Yet beneath that calm surface, strategy took root, and the day would come when truth, patient and precise, would rise. The day of the family gathering arrived, the sun spilling golden light over the tightly packed streets of the city. Voices echoed through narrow lanes as neighbors and relatives came, dressed in bright colors, carrying dishes and small gifts. Inside the house, the daughter-in-law moved calmly, her steps measured, her face serene. Every eye was upon her, not just in curiosity, but in silent expectation. This was a gathering where deeds and words would not go unnoticed, where respect, truth, and reputation were weighed by the careful gaze of the collective. The air was thick with judgment and the hum of quiet anticipation. The mother-in-law greeted guests with practiced warmth, smiles that could charm and eyes that could pierce. Yet, in the midst of polite conversation, cracks began to show. Stories once repeated unquestioned, the tales of the daughter-in-law's alleged failures, suddenly failed to match what the attendees witnessed. The daughter-in-law moved with grace, serving drinks, arranging plates, and speaking politely to everyone. A whispered exchange between neighbors, "Is it true she cannot manage even simple tasks?" fell flat as hands were shown, trays balanced with precision, and a gentle laugh answered the challenge. Doubt stirred, subtle and unspoken, spreading like ripples across a still pond. The contradictions were simple, almost obvious. A statement that had been used to shame her, "She does not know how to serve," was met with undeniable evidence of skill and patience. The lies, once like thick ropes, frayed under the weight of reality. No one needed to shout, no one demanded explanations. Truth revealed itself quietly, like sunlight breaking through clouds, and the household held its breath as deceit faltered under its own logic. The room fell into a heavy silence. Guests shifted uneasily, realizing what they had accepted before was untrue. No chaos erupted, no voices rose in anger. Yet the realization was sharper than any spoken judgment. The mother-in-law's carefully constructed image of control wavered as eyes now measured her not by words, but by the reality in front of them. Quiet understanding took root, stronger than any confrontation could have been. The son stood frozen, his hands at his sides, his heart heavy. Each glance at his wife, so dignified and composed, reminded him of every moment he had stayed silent. His loyalty to his mother had cost him the trust of his marriage and the respect of his own conscience. Guilt rose like a storm inside him, mixing with fear and shame. "I should have spoken," he murmured under his breath, the weight of his inaction pressing down. Responsibility collided with regret, and for the first time, he saw clearly the consequences of silence. The daughter-in-law's calm strength had exposed not only deceit but the truth of his failure as a protector. The mother-in-law's hands, once steady with control, trembled as she watched the gathering around her. The stories she had spun, polished and perfected for months, began to unravel like loose threads in the bright light of truth. Whispers of contradiction floated through the room, carrying weight heavier than any accusation she had ever wielded. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for allies, but saw only the careful observation of neighbors, the quiet approval of elders, and the restrained dignity of her daughter-in-law. Fear no longer guarded her, the invisible shield of authority had crumbled. Power shifted quietly, without a single word raised in anger. The balance moved as naturally as a river following its course, guided by truth alone. There were no blows, no public shaming, yet the effect was undeniable. Those who had once feared her now measured her with clarity. The scales of justice were balanced not by loud accusations, but by honesty and evidence. The daughter-in-law stood at the center, a figure of composed strength. Her eyes met those of the community without fear, her posture straight, her hands folded gently before her. She spoke only when necessary, but every gesture and glance conveyed the truth she carried. Strength, she showed, was not in harsh words or retaliation, but in calm dignity and unwavering composure. When the mother-in-law looked for vengeance, she found none. No insult was returned, no humiliation served. The daughter-in-law chose fairness as her final response, letting the weight of truth and integrity do what anger could never achieve. The community watched, their surprise tangible, as the power of justice manifested quietly yet unmistakably. Shock rippled through the gathering, born not of fear or punishment, but of mercy, clarity, and wisdom. They had expected retaliation, a confrontation to match the cruelty that had once reigned. Instead, they saw a woman standing whole, unbroken, and a lesson carved into the hearts of all present. Justice does not need violence, it needs patience, truth, and the courage to remain steadfast. The impact of her choice lingered longer than any shouted accusation could, leaving both the oppressor and the witnesses to reckon with the unexpected power of moral clarity. The mother-in-law stood in the center of the room, the eyes of the community upon her. The words of truth, laid out calmly and clearly by the daughter-in-law, reverberated in the silence. Faces that had once nodded in agreement with her stories now held doubt, curiosity, and quiet judgment. The weight of shame pressed on her chest heavier than any punishment she had inflicted or imagined. For the first time, she felt exposed, her authority unraveling in the stillness of the hall. The daughter-in-law's calm presence seemed to illuminate the space. There was no vengeance in her stance, no harsh words to punish or humiliate. Yet the power of integrity spoke louder than any threat could. Whispers of admiration for her courage passed from neighbor to neighbor. The community watched as honor returned to the one who had been wronged, and the moral of patience, wisdom, and truth revealed itself in the most profound way. The house, once alive with tension and subtle intimidation, now carried an unfamiliar calm. The absence of tyranny created a quiet, reflective atmosphere. Each room seemed to breathe with relief, as if the walls themselves had been freed from the burden of fear. Outside, the mother-in-law's name no longer carried the weight it once had. Admiration faded, replaced by measured respect or polite distance. Without fear to maintain her dominance, her influence weakened. The power she had wielded like a sword now lay quietly at her feet, diminished by the truth she had tried to hide. Social gatherings no longer centered on her authority. Conversations moved around her rather than about her, and the space she once filled with dominance now echoed with emptiness. Isolation replaced the influence she had taken for granted. Silence, once used to enforce obedience in others, now surrounded her as a reminder that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. The house, the community, and the family had learned a lesson as old as the stories themselves. Cruelty may command fear, but only truth commands lasting respect. The husband sat alone on the veranda, the sun dipping behind the city's tall buildings, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The voices from earlier still echoed in his mind, words of truth spoken calmly, not in anger, yet powerful enough to strip illusions away. He could feel the weight of his silence pressing on him like a heavy stone. "How long did I let fear keep me mute?" he whispered to himself. The lessons of courage and honesty, which he had once overlooked, now became quiet teachers. Every glance at his wife reminded him of what he had failed to protect, her dignity, her honor, their shared trust. Inside the home, the daughter-in-law moved with a serene purpose. The tension that had once vibrated through every corner now lay in gentle stillness. She no longer bristled at words meant to wound. Instead, she carried herself with calm authority, a quiet force that demanded respect without shouting. The marriage, once fragile under hidden cruelty, had shifted. Its structure could not return to the old ways, yet a new foundation began to form, one built on truth, patience, and mutual recognition. Her presence in the household radiated quiet strength. No longer did she feel the need to argue or assert dominance. Her self-respect stood firm, unshaken by past trials. Healing began within her, like a river carving a new path through old stones. The storms of humiliation had passed, leaving a calm, reflective current that nourished her spirit. Forgiveness hovered in the air, unspoken but considered. She weighed it carefully, knowing mercy could be offered without compromising justice. It was a gift that could be given freely, not demanded nor rushed. In this balance, she found peace. Endurance had transformed suffering into dignity, clarity had replaced confusion, and truth had reclaimed its rightful place in both the household and her heart. The husband looked at her, eyes filled with newfound understanding. "I see now," he said softly. "I see what silence has cost me, and what courage can teach." She nodded slightly, a gentle acknowledgment rather than absolution, signaling that the path forward was one of awareness, respect, and the quiet power of inner strength. In that calm, the family began to rebuild, not in the shadow of fear, but under the light of enduring truth. The mother-in-law sat in the quiet of her once bustling home, the echoes of judgment and realization pressing heavily around her. The eyes that had once followed her every command now averted, and the whispers of the community, once loyal to her word, were replaced by silent observation. She spoke no defense, offered no excuse, for the truth weighed heavier than pride. "I built walls of fear," she murmured, voice trembling, "and now they crumble before me." Each memory of control, each moment of cruelty, returned in stark clarity, leaving her alone with the choices that had shaped her life. Outside, neighbors and relatives walked past, their faces a mixture of curiosity and regret. Conversations that had once reinforced her authority now turned inward. "We followed too blindly," one elder admitted quietly, shaking his head. Another whispered, "We taught respect as fear, not as honor." The community realized the danger of loyalty without thought, and the influence she once commanded melted under the weight of truth. Reputation, once the currency of her power, no longer held sway against the clarity of what had really happened. In the home, tradition was remembered differently now. Customs that had been twisted into weapons were restored to their original purpose: guidance, fairness, and balance. Respect, they understood, belonged not to those who demanded it through intimidation, but to those who earned it through justice and integrity. Silence, once used as a shield to protect wrongdoing, now revealed its true cost. Injustice thrives only when voices are muted and accountability is denied. The daughter-in-law walked calmly through the courtyard, her dignity unshaken, her presence a quiet testament to endurance. Power rooted in fear had faded, moral strength towered above it. The household, once a place of hidden cruelty, now breathed in a different rhythm, one of patience, reflection, and the eventual triumph of truth. Justice, delayed but unwavering, spoke at last, not with chaos or vengeance, but with calm clarity. And in that stillness, the lesson lingered: dominance may rule for a time, but dignity outlives it always.